Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our talk titled Heart Failure, Sorting Fact from Fiction and Understanding the Language. I'd like to introduce you to our guest speaker, Aileen Gillick. Aileen is a registered general nurse with a wealth of expertise and specialised training in lifestyle medicine and nutrition. As a member of the Irish Heart Foundation patient support team, she focuses on supporting individuals recovering from stroke, heart conditions, and managing chronic cardiac conditions. Aileen is driven by a passion for empowering individuals to take control of their own health and adopts a patient-centred approach. Aileen emphasises the importance of individuals finding their voice and purpose in navigating their health challenges. According to Aileen, and I love this myself, the person living with the condition serves as the project manager of their own health journey. Through support, guidance, and encouragement, Aileen aims to empower individuals to step into this leadership role, driving their journey towards better health outcomes. So I'm going to hand you over now to Aileen to start the talk.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen, so bear with me for 1 second, and we will get started. So as Maeve mentioned, the idea we had behind this talk was to help people gain the knowledge, the understanding, the confidence to be that project manager in their own health journey. I think sometimes we can hear even one single word can throw us off and reduce our confidence and think, well, I'm not going to ask the question because it might be a stupid question. So I'm hoping that in today's talk, we can kind of help go through some of the myths surrounding a diagnosis of heart failure, and then we'll move on to more of the language. So the language around the diagnosis, the language around some of the tests or diagnostics, which is the fancy term for them. We'll talk about some of the medications and maybe demystify why you might be on them, and hopefully gather some confidence in being able to speak about what you need to speak about. So this is what we're going to do. I've just mentioned it. So we're going to first look at kind of the facts and the myths. I'm just going to go through a few that I hear a lot. I work on the nurse support line here in the Irish Heart Foundation and meet people living with heart failure a lot. And I hear kind of these phrases. So I just want to kind of put them out there and give you an idea of how close or not to the truth they are. And then, like I said, we'll look at that diagnosis, tests, and medications. So we'll just look at some of the myths and the facts and kind of common misconceptions. So the first one, and we come up against this all of the time. I think every day that I'm at work, I come up against this, that heart failure can only affect the elderly. This is most definitely a myth. Whilst people of older or advancing age are more likely to receive a diagnosis of heart failure, people at any age can experience a diagnosis of heart failure. So this is most definitely a myth. The next one, and again, this is something I think that people often feel or think, maybe even are afraid to say when they get their heart failure diagnosis, because it's a big diagnosis. We know that there is no cure for heart failure. It's a chronic condition. It's something that you're going to need to accept and live with to move forward to the next stages. And people worry that it is a death sentence. So they think, you know, what is the answer? You know, when am I going to die? And this isn't a truth. So the truth is that it can't be cured and that it's a chronic condition. However, with proper management, good management and treatment, many, many people with heart failure can continue to live full and impactful lives. And again, through my work, I've seen that. I've seen people through from the phase where they feel, they think, they believe perhaps it's a death sentence, into actually their condition is very well managed, their treatment is working well for them, and they're going about their everyday life. The next one, this probably isn't as common. Maybe this happens for people further down the line in their diagnosis when they're trying to maybe understand it more. And they feel that heart failure is always due to a weakened heart. It's always due to the weakened heart. So again, there's not much maybe we can do about that. Well, there is for a start. So it's not always due to a weakened heart. So it's often, again, due to a weakened heart, but it can sometimes be due to kind of a stiffness in the muscle. So the heart can't fill as well with blood in between those heartbeats. I'm going to describe in a couple of minutes the different diagnoses, again, to try and help you understand some of the vocabulary and words around the diagnosis. And you'll understand quite clearly, hopefully after that, how there's different types of heart failure. Understanding the type of heart failure that you have is important, but just to be aware that not all heart failure is as a result of a weak heart. And the final myth that we often hear is that heart failure is always accompanied by obvious symptoms. Again, sometimes it is. Sometimes it's accompanied by obvious symptoms because actually it's been going on for a while in the background. Whereas the symptoms of heart failure often tend, not always, but often tend to be quite subtle to begin with. And when you maybe get your diagnosis in the heel of the hunt or at the end of the day, you can kind of think back and say, maybe that's what that lack of energy was about. Maybe that's why I was opting out of going for the group walking sessions that I had previously enjoyed. So the symptoms aren't always obvious. And having an awareness of your symptoms once you've had your diagnosis is absolutely key to keeping yourself well. Regular checkups and diagnostic tests are crucial for the early management of heart failure and also the ongoing management of heart failure. So there isn't always obvious symptoms. There can be many little things that are adding to the whole picture, which can result in heart failure. So what is it? So heart failure occurs quite simply when the heart is unable to pump enough blood to meet the body's needs. It's sometimes, particularly in hospital settings, referred to as congestive heart failure or congestive cardiac failure. And more we're hearing the term called heart inefficiency coming up. They're all the same thing. Heart failure is the overarching diagnosis there. But much like a vintage car, while a heart that's been diagnosed with heart failure and the pump isn't working as well, the vintage car may not have the features, the speed, or the brake horsepower as the newer version of the car. The car can still go, the car can still have fun, the car can still live a life as long as we're looking after it well. And this is where those regular checkups, the regular diagnostics and tests, and keeping kind of an awareness in your own wellness and how you feel is absolutely key. If you had the vintage car, you bring that to the mechanic a little bit more often, not because it was broken, but because you wanted it to continue to work well for you, okay? Just to note as well, we sometimes get a question about, is heart failure the same as a heart attack? Just to note that it is not the same as a heart attack. Okay, a heart attack is a sudden blockage of blood flow to the heart, whereas heart failure, remember, is a long-term or chronic condition that affects the pumping action of the heart. I'm going to move through now into the different types of heart failure. And again, if you're the person who's been diagnosed with heart failure or it's a loved one who's been diagnosed with heart failure, it is really good to know what type of heart failure you have been diagnosed with. What's fairly universal across all the diagnosis of heart failure is a phrase called ejection fraction. And you'll hear this often at your initial diagnosis. And this can actually be something that people hear one thing and they don't understand really what we mean by it. I'm going to describe what ejection fraction is. So it's a crucial measure of the heart's pumping efficiency, and it's expressed as a percentage. And it represents the proportion of blood that's pumped out of the heart's left ventricle with each contraction or heartbeat. So as the heart contracts or squeezes or pumps, the ventricles are emptied, okay? And that blood is sent either to your lungs for oxygen or around the body because it's already has its oxygen in it. When we're talking about the ejection fraction, usually when it's termed ejection fraction on its own, usually we're talking about the left side, and that's the blood that's oxygenated and heading around the body to kind of feed everything with its oxygen. Now, this is where things can kind of get lost in translation. What is a normal ejection fraction? Well, a normal ejection fraction is anything from 50 to 70%, okay? So just to be aware that a normal ejection fraction is not 100%. If you're diagnosed with heart failure, sometimes people hear ejection fraction of 20%, 15%, they think, oh my God, you know, I'm 80% or 85% away from where I need to be. You're not. So the kind of, you're in the normal sphere once you're at 50%. The reason we don't want to pump and their body doesn't pump all of the blood out is because basically the sides of the ventricles would stick together. We need, you know, some kind of lubrication to remain in there. So that's why it doesn't pump out 100%. I've just popped in here about left ventricular ejection fraction and right ventricular ejection fraction, and often they're shortened into LVEF or VEF. Typically, you'll see them maybe written on a report that you're given or something like that. It's generally the left ventricle ejection fraction that will be referred to just as your straight ejection fraction. Okay, so just know with ejection fraction, it's the amount of blood that's pumped out at each contraction of the heart. Normal ejection fraction is between 50 and 70%. So if you hear your number, know that the normal is 50. You're not looking for 100. It also doesn't represent your heart function as a whole. The only thing it represents is this pumping function, okay, and the emptying of the ventricle. It's not the entire function of the heart. Sorry, I think, oh yeah, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk through the different types of heart failure. So the first type we have up here is heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, or you'll sometimes hear people calling this HFpEF. Okay, so heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. So this means that when the heart is pumping, it is indeed getting that 50 to 70% of blood out and up and into your body. However, in conditions like HFpEF or heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, what's happening is that the heart's ability to relax and fill properly with sufficient amounts of blood before the heartbeat, that's when it's impacted. So do you remember we said about our myths and our facts that it's always due to a weakened pump? Not always. Sometimes it's due to a stiffer muscle. So the muscle can't relax totally to allow the heart to fill with adequate amounts of blood. The next type of heart failure that you might be diagnosed with is heart failure with mid-range ejection fraction. So this is where the pumping action of the heart is affected. And remember, we're aiming for normal ejection fraction to be between 50 and 70. And in this type of heart failure, usually the ejection fraction is ranging from 40 to 49%. Again, I have the left ventricle here circled, so that's where we're looking at our ejection fraction from. So as the heart contracts, instead of getting out our 50% of our oxygenated blood, we are getting out 40 to 49% of our oxygenated blood. Then we have heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. So this is characterized by a weakened heart muscle again, so the weakened pumping action, and it results in reduced pumping ability with an ejection fraction of less than 40%. When we talk about this, again, we're talking about the left ventricle. We're talking about its action and its emptying ability, basically, with each pump. And sometimes you'll hear this one called HFrEF. So heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. You can also have heart failure with recovered ejection fraction. So this is also known as recovered ejection fraction heart failure sometimes. Sometimes it's called recovered dilated cardiomyopathy. And it refers to a condition where individuals who previously had heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, so HFrEF, experience improvements in their heart function, particularly in terms of the ejection fraction number. So in heart failure with recovered ejection fraction, previously or who had previously reduced ejection fraction, the symptoms of their heart failure may be significantly reduced once they're into recovered ejection fraction. And they may have gotten to this point because now they're feeling well, they're well managed, maybe it's medications that got them to this stage. And their symptoms will generally be less. So if they had been having shortness of breath or fluid retention or lack of kind of endurance in terms of any kind of physical movement or exercise, they might find that once their ejection fraction is recovered, that they don't really have these symptoms anymore. It is important to note that you're still in heart failure. So even if you have a recovered ejection fraction, it does not mean that your heart failure is gone. Or that it's cured. There is no cure. We need to continue to manage it. So if you find yourself in recovered ejection fraction, absolutely celebrate that. That's great. Hoping you feel better, hoping that your symptoms are a lot less. But in terms of your own care and management, it's still really important to know that you're still living with the condition. And then finally, I just put a mention into it about right-sided heart failure. So right-sided heart failure refers to failure of the right ventricle. So all the other types of heart failure, we were talking really mainly about the left ventricle, whereas this time we're talking about the right ventricle. So it's, again, the lower chamber of the heart, but it's pumping the blood so that it can go and get its oxygen. Right-sided heart failure, obviously, the clue is in the name, affects the right side. And this can be actually a little bit trickier to diagnose. Sometimes people wait for their diagnosis for right-sided heart failure for a little bit longer. But it's important to note that it is noted as a type of heart failure. Okay, I'm going to move now on to common tests, or you'll hear doctors or nurses calling them diagnostics. So don't be put off if they're calling them diagnostics. They're just tests, plain and simple. Diagnostics is just a fancy term. So tests are used in the first instance to diagnose your condition, but they will be used during your time with your heart failure consistently. And what the doctors, nurses, medical team are trying to do is they're trying to monitor where your heart is at. So how is your heart health doing in terms of how is it responding to the medications? How is it responding maybe to the lifestyle changes that you made? How are we getting on? Is it getting a bit better? Is it getting a bit worse? Is it a bit stronger? Is it a bit weaker? So you'll hear of these tests and get to know these tests as you go through. So usually one of the first ones that you'll certainly have with your cardiologist will be an echocardiogram, or an echo is usually what it's called. It simply uses ultrasound waves. So like it's like similar to the scan we do when we're looking at babies when on pregnant women. So it's just a little bit of jelly and we pop it across the heart. And the ultrasound waves, they produce black and white images of the heart. They show the valves. They show the blood flow patterns. So the blood should be flowing in a particular direction. It might show if there's a little bit of, maybe some of the valves aren't working very well. And it can help diagnose any kind of structural abnormalities, but it also assesses that cardiac function, and it can help us calculate the ejection fraction. Beside this, we have ECG, or electrocardiogram. This is probably one of the first tests you might have because you can have this with your GP. So ECG records the heart's electrical activity. So if you imagine that your heart pumping function is mechanical, so it's actually the movement of it, and an ECG is looking at the electrical impulse that's causing the contraction of the heart. And it will help detect any irregularities, such as, we call them arrhythmias. So this is just where the heart goes out of rhythm. So your heart should be nice and, a nice flat rhythm. Whereas sometimes in heart failure and other conditions, the rhythm can go off beat. So you might have a regular beat and then you might have a little flutter or whatever in the middle. And the electrocardiogram will help us see that. One ECG isn't as beneficial as a series of ECGs. So it's important, again, this is something that you get at regular checkups with your GP and with your cardiologist. And they look at, how does this ECG look in comparison to the previous ECG? Great question to ask if you're there. How does that look in comparison to before? Because you mightn't have a perfect ECG, but that might be good for you. So again, it's comparison from ECG to ECG that's important. Often cardiologists will order a cardiac magnetic resonance imaging or a cardiac MRI. It's a really good and detailed test. It's non-invasive. And again, it's showing the heart structure, it shows its function, and again, it's showing its blood flow. It's the images that a cardiac MRI create are different to that of an ultrasound. They basically create a better or clearer picture for the cardiology team maybe to refer back to, whereas the echo will produce more data and numbers for us if we're looking back on it. Neither test is better than the other, and they're often used side by side. The cardiologist might do an echo one time, cardiac MRI another time, and they'll have their own reasons for that if they're looking at slightly different things. You can also have some blood tests, which people are kind of maybe even surprised about, that you can look at the heart through a blood test. But there's proteins that are created when your heart muscle is under pressure. And the name of the blood test is proBNP or NT-proBNP. So just know that it's a protein that's produced that we can detect in a blood test that indicates that your heart muscle is under stress or duress. This is a test that is now in Ireland available with your GP. So it can be done with your regular tests, like you've had your test for your cholesterol or your kidney function or whatever. Your proBNP or NT-proBNP can be done at your GP surgery now. I think this is, again, another good question for you as somebody living with heart failure to ask, what is my BNP? What was my proBNP? What would be a better proBNP? So that, again, you're judging as you go on, how I'm feeling, how I'm doing. This is a chronic condition. So it's good to know when you have a small win. So if your NT-proBNP is better than it was, you can say, that is better. So I am moving in the right direction. And that can be good and a motivator to kind of help you, continue to engage with the other things that you need to do to keep yourself well. And then the final test that we have, probably a little bit less common, it's right heart catheterization. Can often happen when they're struggling maybe to get a diagnosis. It's a little bit more invasive. and it involves passing a cannula through and into the right side of the heart. And when they get in there, they measure the pressures. Did I say a cannula into the right side of the heart? That's not what I meant. It's a little tube into the right side of the heart, and they measure pressures and oxygen levels in the heart's chambers. And they sometimes take blood samples when they're in there. And so they measure oxygen levels at different kind of locations. And they measure pressures at like different kind of points along the catheter's path. It can be a very useful test, particularly in diagnosing, like I say, if there's a kind of a tricky diagnosis there. So just to go back over it again, an echocardiogram or an echo is an ultrasound test, fairly non-invasive, and it's looking at the pumping function, kind of the structural stability, ability of your heart. Your ECG is drawing a picture of the electrical kind of impulses that's causing the heart to contract. Your cardiac MRI is producing the similar information to your echo. It's just creating a slightly different picture. Your blood tests are looking at that protein that's produced when the heart muscle is under stress or duress. And your right heart catheterization is looking at pressures within the heart and oxygen levels at various places in the heart. Next, I'm going to move on to common devices that are used in heart failure. Not everybody with heart failure will need or be suitable for devices, and it is a very it's a different choice for everybody if they want it, if they're suitable for it. So it's a good conversation to have with your cardiologist as well. So I think one that most people have heard of is pacemakers. So pacemakers are implanted devices that regulate the heart's rhythm. They deliver electrical impulses to kind of stimulate a regular heart rhythm. They're primarily used to treat people with slower heart rhythms. And another word for that is called bradycardia or bradyarrhythmias. Brady means slow, okay? So anybody with a slow heart rhythm. And the pacemaker ensures that the heart beats at a regular rate, but also at an adequate rate so that it's fast enough to keep us well and going. In heart failure, pacemakers may also be used to kind of coordinate the contractions of the heart chambers, and this can improve cardiac output and symptom management. This is known as cardiac resynchronization therapy or biventricular pacemakers. They're the ones that synchronize the contractions of the heart's ventricles. And it can be, again, there's a specific type of person and a specific type of heart failure that this is suitable for. So if there's any dysynchronicity or the heart rhythms are out, so it's not perfectly, or everybody's not playing the same tune basically in the heart, they might try that cardiac resynchronization therapy pacemaker. Some pacemakers also have additional features such as remote monitoring now. So it means that in the hospital, they can kind of tune into what your pacemaker is doing, what it's needing to do, and it will allow adjustment of device settings and things like that. Other pacemakers, you need to go into the hospital and they do their analysis there and figure out if any of the settings need to be changed. Another really common device in people living with heart failure are implantable cardioverter defibrillators, or ICDs, we call them, because that's quite a mouthful. ICDs, again, are implantable devices, so they're inside and they're designed to monitor the heart's rhythm, similar to that of a pacemaker, but they're also there to deliver electrical shocks when life-threatening arrhythmias occur. So life-threatening arrhythmias is where the rhythm of the heart goes a flutter. So it might be going too fast. So it's pumping and etc., but it's too fast. So it's not a solid, decent pump to get the blood moving. Or it could be in something called fibrillation, where it's like a flutter. It's like a shiver, if you imagine it within the muscle. ICDs are used to prevent sudden cardiac death in people that are living with any condition where they're considered at high risk of this. And it will be used particularly for people who have those ventricular arrhythmias or problems with that heart rhythm, or if their function of the ventricle is significantly poor. So they continuously monitor the heart rhythm, and they deliver appropriate therapies such as pacing. So maybe if it's going too slow, they'll make it a little bit faster, or cardioversion or defibrillation, which is trying to shock the heart into that normal heart rhythm. Again, some ICDs, should I say, also incorporate that resynchronization therapy that we talked about, just where there's maybe that the heart is out of kilter, all parts of it aren't playing the same tune, so it can resynchronize things. Implantable devices do play a crucial role in the comprehensive management of heart failure, but not for everybody, again. So just have the conversation. Remember, all conversations about your treatment are two ways, at least two ways. So your way is important, so ask all of your questions. We know that use of devices can improve symptoms. They can reduce hospitalizations and improve and prolong your overall lifetime. Then we move on to the medication. This is probably, when I speak to people, one of the greatest bugbears, because especially at the start of their journey, people feel like, Janie, can they not make up their mind? Because they started this and now they want to do that, and now they want to increase that. Is it not good enough? Just to know that there are lots of medications in the management of heart failure. It is normal to be on several medications. Interestingly, they all do, they all want to do the same thing at the end of the day, which is take the pressure off the heart pump. So again, if we're driving a vintage car, we're not going to drive it down the motorway at 120 kilometers an hour. We're going to take the pressure off it. We're going to be in the slower lane, but we'll get there. These medications are trying to keep you and your heart in that slower lane so that your heart can function well and you can live well. So you'll notice when I'm describing what each of these medications do, that I'll be repeating myself, because although they mightn't do what they are doing in the same way, they're trying to do the same thing. I hope you understand what I'm saying. So the first one that you might come across are called ACE inhibitors, or the long word here is angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. You don't need to remember that. ACE inhibitors is enough for you to remember. So what they do is they dilate blood vessels, so they make your blood vessels relax. This will reduce your blood pressure and therefore ease the workload on your heart. Examples or a clue to know if you're on an ACE inhibitor or which one is the ACE inhibitor is any of your medications ending in pril. So something like ramipril or lisinopril or enalapril. That's not a perfect way to know, but most of the ACEs will end in ril, okay? The next one we have on the list is your beta blockers. These are probably the best known, I would say. People tend to know beta blockers, but they do. Again, you'll hear me repeating myself here. They're decreasing heart rate, therefore reducing blood pressure, therefore improving heart function and reducing the risk of any of those arrhythmias or the heart going out of rhythm, be it, too fast or fibrillating. How do you know you're on a beta blocker? Well, ask your pharmacist or your doctor, but you also have a clue in the name of your beta blocker. So anything else ending in lol typically is a beta blocker. So bisoprolol is a common one in Ireland, metoprolol, let me think of another one, carvedilol is another one. So lol is a clue that that might be a beta blocker or a beta blocker. Next on our list here are diuretics, or people often call these water tablets. And what they're doing is they're helping to eliminate excess fluid from the body. So sometimes when the heart isn't pumping so well, there's flow coming into the heart and it kind of gets backed up because we're not getting enough blood out in each pump. And this can lead to kind of fluid kind of building up in, we can sometimes see it in our wrists, our ankles, sometimes even around the tummy. So diuretics are going to help eliminate this excess fluid from the body. It'll reduce swelling, but hey presto, it'll also reduce things like shortness of breath, but it will take pressure off the entire system. So again, you will feel better. Your heart is under less pressure. There's lots of different classes now of water tablets, so it's not as easy to figure out which one it is, but generally they'll end in "ide." So bumetanide is one, or frusemide is another one. Some of the brand names will be something like Lasix, so Frusix, or Burinix is another one. Again, figure out which one is your water tablet. Again, your timing of taking that is important. Discuss that with your cardiologist and or your pharmacist. You don't want to be up in the middle of the night piddling. So you're going to need to choose when you're taking that wisely. The next one we have here on the list are the ARBs. So angiotensin II receptor blockers. Again, you don't need to remember that, but maybe know if you're on an ARB. They're really similar to ACE inhibitors. They relax blood vessels and they lower blood pressure and, hey, take pressure off that heart pump. They're sometimes used as an alternative to ACE inhibitors when people who have been on the ACE inhibitors maybe haven't tolerated them very well. Maybe they've had some side effects. So they are a really good option 2, sometimes used as option 1. It depends on the team. A clue to know if you're on an ARB or an angiotensin II receptor blocker is that the name of it will generally end in artin. So examples would include losartan, valsartan, or candesartan. Again, it's not a perfect science. I'm not saying if it's something with artin, it's definitely an ARB, but it's a clue for you to know if you're on an ARB. The next one on the list are our ARNIs, and ARNIs have been relatively new in the sphere of cardiac care. Total game changer, a complete and total game changer. And ARNI stands for angiotensin receptor neprilysin inhibitor. You definitely don't need to remember that. There's no quiz at the end of this. So just know it's your ARNI. This is a combination drug. And both components of the drug are aiming to reduce blood pressure and therefore reducing that workload on your heart pump. Again, you're hearing me repeating myself. They're doing these things, all these medications are doing them coming at it from a slightly different angle, but it's all about taking pressure off that heart pump. ARNI medications, like I say, are a combination of 2 drugs in one. The name of your ARNI will very likely be Entresto. It's the only licensed drug in this drug class at the moment, as far as I'm aware. And it contains an neprilysin inhibitor and an ARB, which we've just spoken about. So your artin, so maybe if you're on a valsartan, it includes that and this neprilysin inhibitor. So remember, both of them are working to widen blood vessels and take the pressure off your heart. Additionally, the second part, or the second component in this drug helps with increased urine production. So it's helping you not retain any of that additional fluid. Again, taking pressure off your heart, making you feel better, reducing hospitalization, and prolonging your good quality life. And the final, last but not least, are our SGLT2 inhibitors. So this is your sodium glucose cotransporter 2 inhibitors. Again, don't need to remember that, but SGLT2. SGLT2s have been used for many years in the care of people living with diabetes. And it was through that they, it came clear that actually this is really helping people improve their heart failure outcomes. And people who were taking these drugs because they had diabetes anyway were doing better with their heart failure. Examples of SGLT2 inhibitors are all really hard to say. They're all long and just a total mouthful. They generally end in flozin. So dapagliflozin is one, and pagliflozin is another one. Or some of the brand names that I'd be aware of is one called Forxiga. So yeah, keep an eye out for those. Maybe have a look at your prescription list and know, right, these are my heart medications. These are the ones that you can expect that they're going to be changed. It's good that your medical team would be changing because your heart function will be changing. It'll be getting worse. It'll be under pressure. It'll be getting better. It'll be under pressure, you know, so it'll go in each direction. So up and down of medications is actually really important. It will become less confusing for you if you try and get your head around which is what and what are they likely to increase or decrease and why. You know, ask the question, why are you increasing or decreasing that? Just to note that heart failure is really complex, but it is manageable and it does require that multidisciplinary approach to care. I think if the only thing you can get from today is that you, the person who's living with the heart failure, or maybe the person who's caring for the person who's living with heart failure, you guys are the main player on the team. So the multidisciplinary team is not all the other people. It's not the nurses and the doctors and the physios. You're on that team and you are the leader. You lead the way. You talk to your medical team. Talk to the people doing the tests. Ask them the questions. Get to know the lingo. You know, don't be afraid to do that. You're well within your rights and it will help you. Because by understanding the facts, debunking the myths, and mastering the language that surrounds heart failure, we really can improve outcomes and enhance the quality of life for people living with heart failure. I know there's a lot in today. I will confirm with Maeve if she'll share maybe some of the slides so that you can have access to them. Just to go over them again if you wanted to. We also have a great resource in our nurse support phone line. So the nurse support phone line is open every day, Monday to Friday. You can call 016685001 or email support@irishheart.ie and you will get in contact with the nurse. If the nurse isn't available, you leave a message and we'll come back to you. So if there's anything in particular around anything to do with your heart failure, but in relation to this, around kind of any kind of concerns or worries, you're not sure if it's true or not true, you know, what you're worried about, or there's something you just plain old don't get, you don't understand, you'd like us to describe that again, that's what the nurses are there for. Definitely reach out and we can help you with that. We also then have some additional support. So we have something called our Heart Connect service, and it's especially for people living with heart failure. And it's a telephone support service where you can get anything from 1 or 2 calls to 4 or 5 calls over a series of several months. And this can be very good at helping you to, you know, gain that confidence, gain that understanding around what all this language means, what it means in the context of your health and your life. And we can help you with that rather than just one very long phone call. We can help you over a series of phone calls. Again, if you want to access that type of service, just give us a shout on the nurse support line and we will help you out with that. And then other things that you can get involved with are we provide counselling for any of our members who are in need and are living with a diagnosis like heart failure. We can help introduce you to others who are walking your path, and often that's the most powerful type of support that we can provide. So we have in-person peer support groups now in a couple of locations in Ireland. We also have lots of online peer support going on. And then we do lots of short courses. So this can be anything from psychoeducation, so understanding how your mind might be working against you when you're trying to tackle issues like a big diagnosis with this. Things like mindfulness and self-compassion. There's also exercise classes. The list is kind of endless. So once you call us on the nurse support line, we'll hopefully help you with your queries, and we can introduce you then to any other services that you might want or require. And thank you for listening. I'll pass you back over to Maeve.
Just had to unmute myself there. Thanks, Aileen. That was brilliant. There was so much in that, but I think you kept the language really simple and straightforward. So hopefully it'll be hugely beneficial to people. And look, we're hoping to put this recording up on our YouTube and our Facebook page as well, so that people like that, they're not going to watch it once and take it all in. So hopefully they can link back in at another date and take more from it. If you don't mind, I have some of them are kind of more observations, and then some of them are some questions. So I might put them to you now. So one, I love the vintage car analogy. That was excellent. And I suppose you see the car, we bring it to the mechanic. For humans, it's the doctor or the hospital. But even before that, have you advice for people on how to even prevent getting, hospital readmissions? Have you advice around that in their self-management, what they could do to prevent that?
Yeah, so if we go back to the car, now it's not just a horrible vintage car we're dealing with your gorgeous vintage car, your gorgeous heart. We only have one. So it is about, being really kind to it. So if we wait until we're sick, we're actually not feeling really well, we didn't want to bother the GP or the heart failure clinic because we know they're really busy. So we kind of sat on our symptoms maybe because we didn't want to bother anybody. We thought maybe they'd pass. What will happen then is when you do contact your GP or your heart failure clinic, things may have progressed too much for them to be able to deal with in their clinics. And then you end up with a hospitalization. So two things happen with that. You end up with a hospitalization. None of us want to go to hospital. And I think that's clear. The other thing that you've done though is you've put your heart under pressure for extra days. Okay. So it's about having your heart under pressure for as less days as possible. So the minute you feel a change, you're on that phone, you're saying, this is different. I don't feel well. I've checked in with myself. I've used maybe the checklist that the Irish Heart Foundation is producing for Heart Failure Week. I know that something is different. Your GP or your heart failure clinic is never going to be cross with that. That's you doing your check-in, and that's you stopping your hospitalization. Okay, because you've gone that couple of days early, so gained a couple of days. So if we liken that to the mechanic, if you only brought your car to the mechanic when it was broken down or not going very well, you couldn't accelerate or something. I know nothing about cars, by the way. It would cost you a lot more money, and the car would probably be gone for days. Whereas if you plan to bring your car to the mechanic for the service, so I'll bring it to you Friday, I'll drop it for you for 9, I know it'll be ready for collection at 11, that'll have a lot less impact on your life. And for your car, the big things are less likely to go because you're tipping away at it, maintaining it. Okay, so it's all about going to those regular appointments, even when you're feeling well. Even they're nearly more important when you're feeling well, because it kind of makes you check in, and that they're the things that are likely to keep you out of hospital, keep you well, and less likely to put your heart under pressure.
Great. And I suppose you're aware, but the people watching this may not be aware that we have a new resource coming out that may help with some of that. So that's our Take 3 Beats resource, which is available on our website. Or again, if you phone our nurse support line, that could be sent out to you. And that can, I suppose, helps with that maintenance piece and that daily check-in.
Yeah, 100%. And with the Take 3 Beats resource, it's an A4 page. Am I right, Maeve? Is it A4? Yeah. Like, I think that's something, if you're living with heart failure, you have that stuck up if you have a private bathroom, somewhere where you can every day just go, Yes, I've taken my medications. Yes, I've checked that I've no excess fluid. I've weighed myself. And yes, I have had a little check-in about how I feel. So has there been any changes in my tolerance of exercise or movement? Has there been any changes in my energy, my appetite, whatever it is for different people? And it just makes you just stop and think. And that can take like 30 seconds.
Mm.
And in that 30 seconds, in the heel of the hunt, you're looking after your heart and you're reducing your risk of hospitalization.
Yeah. And I know when we were designing that resource, it was for sticking up on your mirror, or another place you had suggested was the inside of a medicine cabinet, again, where you're going daily. So they're good spots to put them in just to remind yourself to use them. So the other thing that I just found interesting, and I think something that is just so important is, I think you put it that as part of the multidisciplinary team, the person with heart failure is the leader of that team. And I kind of link back to some of the stuff you were saying in terms of knowing their medication. So you gave us some good examples of how to recognize maybe your beta blocker and stuff, but I'm assuming if people aren't sure, the best people to go to are their pharmacy or their doctor, yeah?
100%. And you know, when you are diagnosed at first with heart failure, sometimes people go from being on nothing to being on, you know, these 4, 5, 6 medications. And that can be so confusing. And then on top of that, it's changing all the time. You know, every appointment, it's like, oh, we'll increase this one and we'll add in this one. And instead of throwing it all up in the air and saying, oh, I don't know anything about any of that, I'm just going to take what I'm told, just little by little. So say, right, this month I'm going to figure out, what does that fella do? You know, what time should I take that at? What does it do for me? How important is it? What dosage am I at? Is that one likely to go up or down? You know, so again, little by little, you can't go in and know everything about heart failure. You didn't know you were going to get the diagnosis. You'd never heard about any of these medications possibly before. So just little by little. So each time you're in the pharmacy, you can ask an additional question. And pharmacists are brilliant because they will have I know they're all very busy, but they are more likely to have the time. You don't have to make an appointment to see them. Do you know what I mean? Whereas you can maybe forget to ask the question with your doctor because there can be other stuff going on. The changing in the medication can happen at the end of the appointment and discussion is over. So if you forget that, cut yourself some slack. You can ask the pharmacist. They're an amazing resource and will have great insight into why you're on it, how you should take it, and where it's likely to go. So is this something that's likely to be changed or go up or down or whatever?
And kind of on a similar point, so again, back to people being the leader of their own multidisciplinary team, you said a couple of times of asking the question why. So like, why am I having this test? Why is my medication being changed? I just think that's another really important one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is because sometimes, say, if somebody says you need to do, I don't know, a cardiac MRI. For some people, it's quite a small space, and that's actually a really stressful situation for some people. And if you add into that person doesn't even know why they're having it done, like, then what's the point? You know, that makes it more stressful. So if you are already in that stressful situation, knowing the why. So why are we doing this now? Okay, Maeve, we're doing this because we've noticed that your symptoms have increased maybe over the last 6 months, and we just want to figure out what's going on and has anything changed in relation to your heart function. Then Maeve is more likely to go off and say, okay, don't really like this test, but I understand there's a very good reason for this. And often if you don't ask the why, it's not clear, you know, and that's nobody's fault. It just is what it is. And never be afraid to ask, like doctors, nurses, anybody on the team won't mind being asked. It's not that you're saying, you know, why I don't want to have it. It's like, no, I want to understand why I need to have it. So you're not questioning their thought process or their authority or anything like that. I think that's maybe what holds us back a little bit. But I think you can just ask, you mentioned a cardiac MRI. I'm just wondering, why is that appropriate at the moment? And get your answer from there.
Great, thank you. And another thing you brought up, and it comes up for us on the Heart Connect service quite a bit, which is they don't always, the clinics and the hubs and all that tend to be moving away from the term heart failure. So I think the other alternative you gave us there was heart inefficiency. Are there other terms we should be aware of that people are
Yeah.
using instead of heart failure now?
Yeah, heart inefficiency, heart insufficiency, heart pump issues. They're the ones that come across. In the hospitals can be congestive cardiac failure. But heart failure, albeit kind of a rotten term, I don't think any of us really like it. It is the term that is the proper key medical term at the moment. Um, so again, if you're unclear maybe about your diagnosis, um, ask them what is the diagnosis, what is the proper medical term for my condition. Because they're only words, and whether you're describing it as heart inefficiency or heart failure, well, it's the same thing. But I think it's good to know, like, if somebody thinks they're heart inefficiency, but they don't recognize that as heart failure, they mightn't engage with, services like this that maybe identify as a heart failure service. And the reason we do that is because it is that overarching, globally understood term to describe this heart condition.
Great. And just one last thing before we go, and again, this is repeating more what you said than a question is, so I feel like if people have, a one-off question about their condition or something like that, the heart or the nurse support line is the best place to go. And I think I would completely agree with that. And then I suppose to help people kind of understand their condition and maybe become, as you said, the leaders of their heart failure team, the Heart Connect service is quite good because that's it's over a series of months and you kind of take one topic at a time instead of trying to cram it all into the one phone call.
100%. And what I find when I do some of the Heart Connect calls is that because we're calling over a number of months, there's invariably some medical appointments in there. So we can help the member get ready for that medical appointment. It maybe there's been some burning questions, issues, concerns for that person. We can help them kind of sort through what they are, maybe get them down on paper, maybe encourage them to bring a family member with them. And then we can check in with them after the appointment. How did that appointment go? What came up from that? Did that resolve things for you? Did they say anything that you want me to clarify? So again, ask. And that's the only way you'll find out is if you ask.
Excellent. Aileen, thank you so much for your time. As I said, it was so useful. And I think you kept the language really simple. So hopefully it's going to be really useful to our members. Hopefully we'll put it up on the YouTube page as well. So even if people don't catch it, this time around, they'll be able to view it at a later date when it suits them. So thank you so much, Aileen.
Thank you, Maeve. Bye now.